It is a synthetic opioid, meaning it is manufactured. It's not a naturally occurring opioid. And it's very, very powerful, meaning just a little bit goes a long way. So it's very easy to overdose on any particular dosage of fentanyl. So it really packs a wallop, is usually reserved for medical purposes like intractable pain that's not well controlled with other medication. The interesting thing about fentanyl is it's been around for a long time, and there have been pockets of people who do use it for unhealthy motives or reasons, and they've had bad outcomes. But the one part that's not talked about in the news a lot that I saw happening was actually the involvement of cryptocurrency in fentanyl. So how things came about is there was a time when prescription opioids were flooding the market. Then it switched over to heroin because prescription opioids became hard to get. Then the heroin market started to become more competitive. And I saw these young people years ago who started to dabble in cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, and they would go on the dark web. But they didn't trust anyone on the dark web, because who would trust people on the dark web, right? Except cryptocurrency came around so that you could be anonymous and you could leave reviews just like you do on Amazon. So these sites started to pop up, and people were getting fentanyl from these vendors, these labs from across the world, having fentanyl shipped to their house in powder and pressed forms. And that market has evolved. And now it's everywhere. And you see fentanyl being cut into many, many different kinds of street drugs. And the fatalities, of course, are overwhelming for this country. Their intent is not to kill the customers, but they also aren't scientists exactly. So what's happening is it's really a matter of economics. If you go to the grocery store and you try to find 100% pure orange juice, you're going to pay a premium for it. So there's always a value in cutting a drug in the black market with something else so that you can stretch your profits, if you will. Most things that get cut in, though, don't add bang for buck. Various powders, most of them are inert or don't do anything. Fentanyl came around and you could sprinkle just a little bit of it in and it would pack a punch. And so you could cut it into opioids or other drugs. People would press fentanyl so that it would look like OxyContin, a very famous pain medication that killed a lot of people. And so you can make a lot more money. And the reason is because on the dark web and through these vendors, you're getting fentanyl powder for very cheap. Because it goes such a long way for such a small amount, it just makes sense economically to cut it with something. It's bang for a buck. But unfortunately, it's not distributed well, and a lot of people pass away. The catalyst really was the combination of not just the dark web. I don't think the dark web by itself could have done it. It was cryptocurrency that created the anonymity. That was the seed of it. And then I think black market dealers started to contact these labs directly. So now it's not just a dark web, it's out there. This has transformed, for example, the methamphetamine market. It used to be kind of Breaking Bad, kind of, you know what I mean? There were stereotypes of it being backwoods or something. It's not anymore. It's very pure, coming through laboratories. And so lots of different pills are fake and being cut. The fake pill industry has really blossomed. And I've seen that evolve too. People would get pressed pills and you could tell they're pressed initially. But now, whether it's Xanax or fentanyl or other drugs, it's very hard to tell. And fentanyl tends to be cut into a lot of things because you can get bang for buck for it. It's really hard to compare apples to apples because the opioid deaths have increased and then plateaued. And so there's some variation, but the black market's very different. So in the 90s, when it was brewing, it was very much doctors overprescribing and prescription pain medications and pharmaceutical companies. And then we created laws to stamp that out, and then they became harder to access. And so then people turned to heroin, and that evolved into fentanyl. So we're actually talking about different stages of the same epidemic. So it's very hard to say, is it better or worse? I'd say it's evolved. In some ways, it's more deadly than ever before because of the presence of fentanyl and how deadly it can be. But there's also more hope. Stigma about addiction has dropped a little bit. Access to treatment has improved just a little bit. We got a long ways to go with both. And treatments are out there, and people are talking about treatments like medications for opioid use disorders, medications to reverse overdose like Narcan. And so whether it's methadone or buprenorphine, these medications that people may have heard about in the news, there are medications that can prolong people's lives, prevent overdoses. And so it's not just better or worse, it's a different kind of epidemic, but there's also more hope than there was before. We've known that times of economic hardship, pandemics, other kinds of tragic times, they tend to increase despair in people, and use of substances, whether it's alcohol or other substances, tends to go up. And the fallouts come with it. And we've seen that in the mental health arena. We've seen in the substance use arena. So this was predictable because I think the pandemic shows us that tragedies do not affect all of us proportionately. they affect us in different ways. And you see that for communities of color. You see that with people with mental health issues and addiction, that when things occur like a pandemic, people get affected in disproportionate ways. And we certainly saw that in our population. Their safety nets, their networks were falling apart at a faster rate than maybe other Americans. And so the good news, though, of this, the silver lining of it is, I think all of us saw the importance of mental health issues, the importance of addiction treatment and prevention, because the pandemic illuminated all the things that are important to us and all the ways in which our society can do better, because there's a lot of stigma around. And I think the pandemic took advantage of that. While we talk about opioids and it gets the headlines, right? So you talked about 93,000 people dying from combined overdoses on various substances. Well, guess what? 95,000 people die from alcohol-related deaths every year. And then if you think about tobacco, 480,000 people a year die. So tobacco is king, alcohol is next, and then it's these substances. And you think about how we treat alcohol in very different ways. And so instead of morally judging alcohol, because it's not a person, it's a chemical. Lots of people, like I told you in the distribution, drink fine without problems, but there's a subset of people where we got to give them the openness to ask for help when they need it, because they will struggle if they drink in a way, and they will have problems with it. Over the past few decades, alcohol vendors have been targeting women, college-educated women. Over the past few decades, actually, in both the UK and in the United States, college-educated women have been targeted by campaigns like Rosé Wine for alcohol, because they have more spending money, and there's we got a long ways to go, but there's better gender equality than there was before, and so they're being targets. And so alcohol is definitely a thing. It's a huge thing, and on the public health scale, yes, bigger than opioids.